Good morning. Is your home your castle? Is your house really your castle? A High Court judge has ruled a property owner may have to trim their trees to improve their neighbours' Wi-Fi access. The neighbour's not getting very good Wi-Fi because the trees are in the way. So how much power do your neighbours have over your property? Property Institute CEO Ashley Church is with us now. G'day Ashley, welcome to the program as
G'day,
always. Hey, so I've set the case out there for you. Who's in the right? Who has the power here?
Oh, look, there's an enormous amount of subjectivity in this, Duncan, and I should probably just start by saying that, you know, probably you'd normally get a QC or a High Court judge doing this. You've got me this morning, austerity cuts, obviously, and so I wouldn't take too... while what I'm going to talk about is going to be interesting, obviously, in the final analysis, if you're dealing with these issues as neighbours, the best result's always going to be around trying to resolve it by mutual agreement, and that's going to become really obvious. But when you look at who's got rights over your property, there's a big, long list. Councils and governments obviously have rights. They can tell you to do certain things, but there's also statutory legislative powers that are given to organisations like Chorus, to lines companies, power lines companies, to roading organisations. All of those organisations seem to have various different rights that relate to things like, for example, with power companies, if trees are impacting on power lines, they can force you to actually cut those trees. The only parties that actually don't have automatic rights, or very few automatic rights, are neighbours. You over your neighbour and your neighbour over you. So it's actually quite difficult to determine in these cases. There's kind of a wisdom of Solomon that's required to actually determine who's in the right in these cases. So who's right depends on which side of this argument you're on.
Okay, well, who's right is probably the judge's view on all this. And despite your wish that we got a High Court judge, I have never interviewed a High Court judge on this. A sitting High Court judge, they just don't comment. So they're above and beyond our reach. In terms of this case, though, I would simply bring someone like Chorus, actually, because they're pretty effective at this. I'd ring Chorus and say, hey, can you come around here and sort this out for us? Act as mediator, and can you move the Wi-Fi somewhere so this person can get the Wi-Fi and then all is over? I wonder if there's something deeper in this whole scrap.
In this particular case, if you read between the lines, there were basically two causes that were being cited. One of them was around enjoyment of view, and the other one was around the eroding of the signal for Wi-Fi. I suspect if you look at this, the first one was probably actually really the issue.
Yes, I agree.
The second one was kind of a red herring. But the reason, obviously, they've introduced the second one is because that enjoyment of view thing, there's basically three reasons, three causes of action for which people can actually go to the court to actually see if they can get something done with a neighbour. One's around potential or actual danger. Well, clearly that wasn't the case here. The second was around risk to health or property. And the third one is this really sort of nebulous area called undue interference with reasonable enjoyment of land. And so obviously that's what they've tried to do here. The problem with that is an enormous amount of subjectivity in that, Duncan, and in determining what actually constitutes an unreasonable impeding of enjoyment of land versus the private property rights. It seems
ridiculous to me. I mean, these guys have gone to court over this, over $69.95 access to a monthly Wi-Fi. Come on, they would have spent thousands on lawyers. I mean, clearly there's a lot more at play here. But what worries me is that people have tied up that resource and spent that sort of money. You get round the table, you get Mark Sainsbury in to do Neighbours at War again, and there you go.
And that's the thing. And so there's basically, in terms of what you can do to get resolution, the High Court, or the courts, sorry, should really be a process of last resort.
Yes.
There's mediation, there's the dispute tribunal, but I would argue in most of these cases, go and talk to your neighbour, because if you can get mutual agreement, that's by far and away the best outcome, can be done the quickest, and it's not going to cost you too much money.
Yeah, no, this really frustrates me, this. And you said it in Wellington as well with that fence. There was a fence just on Oriental Bay there, and that went right the way through to the court as well. Does the court offer mediators? I mean, is there a mediation service? I mean, Citizens Advice Bureau is probably good on this too.
Yeah, there is a mediation service, although I think one of the criticisms of that service is that I don't think that the recommendations that come out of that are binding, whereas with the disputes tribunal they are. So I suspect that people generally go through that rather than through the mediation service for that very reason. Incidentally, just coming back to that issue of subjectivity, Duncan, one of the issues that came up yesterday was around what would happen, for example, if somebody built a really large statue in their backyard. So let's say you built a statue of Donald Trump in your backyard. You thought it was wonderful, your neighbour thought it was absolutely hideous. The question of determining whether it is wonderful or it is hideous is entirely subjective, because one man's art obviously is another man's junk. So that's why this process is so difficult, and why it's really important that if you can, you try and resolve it through simple channels like direct contact with your neighbour than going through the court process.
You said it well. We will leave it there. You said it well. Thank you so much. And how did you know I had that Trump statue in my backyard? Very, very good of you. Please don't complain about it.